everyone. King's Information Network podcast, working our way through Book 2, Confronting the Past. We are up to Chapter 17, so let's get going. Chapter 17. Chris swaggered over, grinning as he wiped the blood off his knife onto his pants. Fair fight, he asked. Morgan shrunk back without conscious thought. Russ nodded slowly. Fair fight, Chris, he said, before shrugging with his good arm. Expression a tad smug, but not a good one. You got lucky. Zeke lost his footing on that last lunge, otherwise it would have been simple to block. It was skill, he growled, taking a threatening step forward, knife still out, and pointed at Russ. Maybe, maybe not. You must have some, if you do that often. Or maybe Zeke was more skilled than your usual opponents. I'd heard he had quite a bit of talent. Watching Chris's face darken was like threatening a fully grown bear with danger to her cub, Morgan decided. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and she wondered if she needed to step on Russ's foot like she punched Matt's hand that morning. She winced. Could it have only been that morning? It seemed so much longer ago. He did, and I beat him with skill, Russ. If you say so, he said with another brief shrug. I don't suppose you have a shirt I could borrow. It's a bit chilly out here without anything on. One of Chris's men approached then. Boss, I hate to interrupt, but he trailed off and was nudged forward another step by his buddies. Chris turned to look at him, the anger fading from his face. Me and Mike thought we saw Soren Dacamar, sir. There was this man talking to me during the fight, and I wasn't paying much attention to him, see, because, well, you know, I didn't want to miss the fight, and he seemed to know a lot. But then I actually really looked. We would have sworn it was Soren Dacamar, sir. He's very distinctive looking, you know, and, well, yeah. He trailed off as Chris stared at him. Morgan risked a glance at Russ to see him grinning in satisfaction. Soren Dacamar, Chris finally said slowly. The man swallowed and nodded. Yes, sir. I know he's supposed to be dead, but I also think he was right behind me a bit ago. Soren Dacamar has been dead for 5 years, Chris said. I thought you said you trusted your men, Russ commented. His old friend spun on him. One more word out of you, Russell Darcy, he growled. Russ smiled serenely. I'm just saying. Soren Dacamar has been dead for 5 years, he repeated. There's no way he could have been here today. I don't doubt, however, that you saw someone who looked like him, he added. Probably one of Russ's many kin friends, Checking to see if you're still alive? You'd think someone would have noticed if Colin employed a man who looked like Soren Dacamar. I doubt that would go over well, no matter how nice the person might be. The king probably wouldn't appreciate the near-constant reminder of his kidnapping, Russ replied calmly. Morgan was impressed at his ability to spin a lie like that. She needed lessons. Chris laughed. Oh, very clever of you, Russ. Trying to distract me from the fact your friends were lurking around to check on you. I suppose seeing that all 3 of you were still alive made them pretty happy, huh? He asked gleefully. Morgan felt Russ and Matt tense on either side of her and gathered her own balance, knowing him well enough by now to know that particular tone spelled trouble. It's possible, Russ said, keeping his own tone studiously neutral as he let his injured arm drop to his side, eyes fixed on Chris. That's a shame. What is? That they get excited over nothing. They don't stand a chance, you know. You'll all be long dead before they get to you again, he said, and smiled, reaching out to touch Morgan's chin. Although, with Morgan, I'm going to pretend and hide her away from me. She'd make a good gesture. She shivered, but held his dancing gaze. Leave her alone, Chris, Russ said, pushing Chris's arm away from her. The man's head snapped over to face Russ, and he grinned. Or what, Russ? Trust me, leave her alone, he repeated, voice dangerously low. Chris's grin widened. I don't particularly like you threatening me, Russ. You should be more careful. He reached towards Morgan again, who forced herself to stand steady. This time, it was Matt's arm that blocked its passage. Leave her alone, he said, matching Russ's tone. Very foolish of them to get excited, Chris said, eyes sparkling as he met Morgan's gaze. Very foolish indeed. His other arm flicked out, once again ridiculously fast. Morgan couldn't even follow it, didn't see the knife plunge into Matt's stomach, but she did see the sudden shock register on Matt's face. Then, Russ left her side, slamming into Chris with surprising force considering how close they all were. The two went down in a tangle of flying limbs, and for an instinct, Morgan's common sense told her to pull them apart before Russ was killed too. Better to save one than to lose both. But Matt staggered, falling, and instinct kicked in. She caught him awkwardly, grunting under his weight, and lowered him carefully to the ground. Both his hands were pressed against his stomach, but considering the amount of blood, Morgan knew with a sinking heart that it was a lost cause. She tugged her outer shirt off anyway, shivering as the wind cut through the much thinner undershirt almost immediately, and pressed it hard against the gash. Matt, I can take care of myself, she told him, blinking away tears. You should have, she trailed off, shaking her head, wondering why none of Chris's men had pulled Russ off him yet, as the two struggled on the ground a few feet away. Matt smuggled faintly around the pain vividly spelled out in his face. I was never going to make it, Morgan. Malone hates me too much. Thinks I took Russ away from him, he managed, grimacing with almost every word. Stop talking, she ordered, glaring at him. You're making it worse. The smile widened a bit. Don't ever lose that feistiness, Morgan. Promise me, because it's a big part of what makes you a good person. I'm glad I got to know you. I have a feeling you'll be one of the best Kin ever has to offer. She felt her cheeks hit heat at the compliments. Matt, you idiot, cut it out, she whispered. It's hurting you. One shoulder lifted in a small shrug. Everything hurts, he told her. Now go get Russ off Malone before he gets seriously hurt. I'm not leaving you to die by yourself in the dirt, she growled, wanting to shake sense into him. Why did he keep talking? He laughed, and she could hear an odd noise in the action, slight, but unnerving all the same. Don't ever stop being a good person. It's what Malone wants. Don't let him... His breath hitched, and he shuddered under her hands. Don't let him convince you to be anything but. And those lessons? Learn them and ignore them. Chart your own path, he said, voice getting fainter. Morgan, Matt, shut the hell up, Morgan said desperately, eyes darting to his stomach and the blood pooling around her saturated shirt. God damn it, she added, choking on her own tears. Damn it, Matt, we were both supposed to make it. The smile reappeared briefly. Good luck, Morgan. She opened her mouth to respond, but was distracted by a cry of pain. Her head jerked up to see Chris sitting up and Russ cradling his injured shoulder as he curled into the fetal position. Morgan froze for a moment, torn, before she felt Matt's hands loosen their grip on his wound and slip to the slide. Her eyes slowly traveled back down to him, but Matt's eyes were closed, chest no longer heaving in pain. She heard another yelp of pain and found herself setting Matt gently on the ground as she got to her feet. Chris. He looked up from his victim, having been kicking Russ repeatedly hard in the side, back, whatever was exposed. Chris glanced at Matt's still body and grinned. Yes, Morgan? Leave him alone. His face lit up in glee. Or what? Leave him alone, she repeated, stepping towards him. In a fit of childishness, Chris turned away from her and kicked Russ again. Something inside Morgan snapped, even more so than when she'd gone to Matt's aid, and she charged him. Chris staggered, then fell this time, thrown off balance. Morgan caught herself and stood between Chris and Russ, breathing heavily. I said, leave him alone. Russ rolled over to look up at her, but other than that, no one moved for a long moment. Chris's eyes were wide as he stared up at her from his position on the ground. Finally, Kev stepped forward, but Chris waved him off, climbing slowly to his feet. Morgan could tell either she or Russ had injured him, because he wasn't putting his full weight on one leg. You continue to surprise me, Morgan Campbell, he said quietly as he studied her. He will survive this. It's done, Chris, she told him, holding his gaze steady, the fire still raging inside her. Done? Is that what you think? He asked. She stared at him for another moment before bending down and helping heave Russ to his feet. You all right? She asked. Russ shrugged and swayed slightly, eyes not quite focusing. Morgan sighed at the blood from his shoulder and carefully slipped an arm under his. We're going back to our room now. I'm going to need more bandages. Then you'll bring me something to write with and a piece of paper. We'll need food and water, and then you'll take Matt, along with the letter, back to Shannon so he can be buried properly, she said, voice a monotone as she locked gazes with him freshly. She wondered when her own head had stopped spinning, or if it even had. Why should I? The childish tone was back. Because everyone needs to do at least one decent thing in their lifetime, she said tiredly, trying to remember the last time she'd fallen asleep and not fallen unconscious. Giving Matt the end he deserves is the least you can do. Then, if you want to hurt me for hitting you, go right ahead. I really don't give a shit anymore. But if you don't give Matt back to the people who love him, you will regret it, one way or another. Something in her expression must have shown how serious she was at that moment, because surprisingly, he merely nodded. Kev, escort them back. Joe, go collect some bandages and a piece of paper and writing utensil for Morgan. No one touch Matthew. He turned away, limping slightly. Morgan looked at Russ in concern. Russ? He glanced at her, meeting her eye. He's gone, he said simply, words, much to Morgan's surprise, not slurred. She nodded, finding herself fighting back fresh tears. Yes, he is. But it's Matt. Matt's indestructible, Russ said plaintively. Morgan's gaze darted to Matt's body for a moment before she forced herself to look away. No one's indestructible, Russ, she said with a sad smile, before nudging him around and following Kev back into the building. He didn't speak again as they traversed the long corridors before Kev pushed open the door and let them in. Morgan carefully made her way to the far wall before gently settling Russ down against it. Russ, she said, crouching down in front of him. She waited until he'd focused on her again, eyes red-rimmed with unshed tears. I need you to tell me what hurts, Morgan told him, speaking slowly, not sure how much he was competing at that moment. Russ laughed shortly and took his hand off his shoulder, moving to rub his eye. But Morgan caught his wrist before he could complete the motion. What? He asked blankly. Your hand is covered in blood. I don't think you want to get that in your eyes. He blinked down at his hand and looked her over. You're covered too. I know. I didn't think Chris would kill him, he said, looking down at his own blood-stained hands. Fuck, Morgan, he killed him. Just like that. No chance, no warning, no nothing. How could someone do that? Russ shook his head. No, don't tell me that it's how Chris is. I should know that. I really should. Matt, his name hitched at the name, has certainly told me that enough over the years. But we were friends once. And Matt's been my friend the whole time. I wrote to him. I kept up with him. I knew what he was doing, and he knew what I was doing. I've always loved Shannon, but Matt, I can't believe he's gone. Just like that. Morgan took a deep breath, trying not to start crying at the desperate tone in Russ's voice. Matt was a good man, and he died how he would have liked, defending others. But it was such a waste. Why didn't he stab me? I'd just done the same thing. Russ, you can't blame yourself, she said. I can't blame myself as much as I might like. It was Chris who killed him. It was Chris who has no sense of right and wrong or common decency. Her throat cleared behind her, and Morgan turned wearily, expecting Chris to be there, ready to slit her stomach wide open as well. Luckily, it was Joe, holding a pile of bandages in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. Behind him were two other minions, one with fresh water and the other with fresh food and drinking water. As ordered by the boss, Joe said flatly, before dumping it all near the previous small pile of cloth. The other two left behind their loads as well, collecting old bowls and buckets, before all three vanished out the door. Morgan heard it click behind them. With a sigh, she levered herself to her feet and went over, first washing her hands in one bucket before dragging them both closer. It took a bit to pull everything so she could sit right in front of Russ, whose gaze had gone distinctly distant. She didn't bother to bring him back to the present, instead choosing a clean bandage, wetting it, and stuffing it into his hands. Automatically, he wiped them down, blinking as the motion jerked him back. Sorry. She smiled faintly, not quite meeting his eyes, afraid his expression would start the tears she was fighting. It's fine. I'm going to need your help in replacing the bandage on your arm. Is there anything else I need to deal with? Morgan, he said softly, and reached out with his now clean hand, touching her chin. Hey, look at me. She forced her gaze up, biting her lip. What? She asked, trying to sound short, not sure she wanted to hear what was coming next. I'm sorry I ever got you into this. He shook his head slightly. It wasn't right of me to conceal my past. Everyone's got something they hide, Russ. You're not alone. Russ took a deep breath and now did rub his eyes. Still, Shut up, Russell, she said sharply. He blinked, clearly surprised at her tone. Morgan? Shut up, okay? God's breath, Russ, it is not your fault. None of this is your fault. Chris would have been fucked up whether he knew you or not. You didn't do this to him, and you didn't kill Matt. None of this is your fault, and if you started on it one more time, I will punch you. His jaw dropped, and she snorted. Okay, when I tell you, I need you to put the fresh dressing on your shoulder. She sighed, inspecting the damage to try and see how badly it hurt further in going after Chris. Why did you jump him? You're not seriously asking me that question, are you? Morgan shook her head. No. Did you notice that he was limping? One of us heard him at least. Can't believe you jumped him. What if he done the same thing as last time? I'm not a child, Russ, she said, bristling. I know what I'm doing. I was trained, remember? He probably would have killed you too if I hadn't stepped in. I've lost one friend today, and I'm not losing another. Understand? That understood, he said with a small smile. I'm allowed to worry, though, aren't I? Or does that qualify as blaming myself? He asked lightly, and Morgan could hear a bit of the rust from before Chris stabbed Matt sleeping through. She managed to return the smile, cleaning up the last of the blood as she did. No, that's allowed. No one can stop worrying because they're told to. I can't stop you blaming yourself either, but that at least is easier to yell at you about, she said with a shrug. Very carefully, Morgan peeled back the saturated binding and peered critically at Russ's shoulder wound. It wasn't as bad as she'd thought, and he hadn't opened it as wide as she'd feared either. Can I? She asked, gesturing with the cloth at the wound. Russ nodded, jaw tightening and eyes closing as she dabbed gently at it. He twitched, but didn't make a sound until she stopped. He glanced down, taking it in for himself. Might lose a bit of motion in my arm from this, Russ said, frowning. If you keep attempting to punch Chris in the face with it, I can almost guarantee you will. There's something very satisfying about punching Chris in the face, though, he replied, as he held a new dressing over the wound so she could tie it off. Use your other hand, she informed him dryly. What's the fun in that? Morgan knew he was making an effort to be positive, and she smiled. It'll save you from being in pain for the rest of your life? Way to spoil the fun, Morgan, he muttered. She felt her smile widen despite herself as she tied the cloth off tightly. Is there anything else I need to fix? No, just bruises. Would have had him if he hadn't managed to catch me in the shoulder, he said, sounding frustrated. How did he catch you initially anyway? Used his cronies. We were fighting. I started to win as usual, and his men jumped me. That's when he stabbed me. Yeah, well, he seems to like the defenseless ones, Morgan agreed sourly, before gesturing towards the bowls of cooling stew. Eat it before it gets cold, she said, before shifting around to lean against the wall next to him, resting her head on the wonderfully cool stone. Going to follow your own advice? I'm not hungry, she said without opening her eyes. Morgan, you need to eat. That's an order. She frowned, sitting up again to glare at him. What if I refuse? Colin will write you up for insubordination to a superior officer. She stared at him and then started laughing. It began as a giggle, but she soon found herself holding her stomach as she laughed. It hurt, but she couldn't help it. Russ blinked before the ridiculousness of his statement sunk in, and he grinned, chuckling. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the best response considering. But seriously, you didn't eat the last time he fed you either. I saw the full bowls. You need to keep your strength up as much as I do. Matt, he paused, taking a breath before pushing on. Matt said you'd lost a lot of blood, and head wounds are as dangerous, if not more so, than regular wounds. She rolled her eyes, reaching over and picking up the bowl. If it'll shut you up, fine. He grinned briefly, expression shadowed but not as deeply as before. Thank you. You're welcome, she replied automatically and stared down at the stew, wondering why life sometimes forced people to have to get past horrible things to survive. Didn't seem fair to Matt that they were already laughing and smiling, but there wasn't much else they could do. Not if they wanted to make it out of there with their sanity intact. She sighed, and Russ nudged her gently. Eat, he ordered. I'm not hungry, she repeated. Morgan. She made a face, but started spooning it in to get it over with. She was surprised at how much better the addition of food made her feel. She reached over, exchanged bowls, and greedily downed the water as well. Better? He asked, glancing down at her. Yeah, stupid food, Morgan said, crawling over to grab the pencil and paper before settling back at Russ's side, their shoulders touching. What are we going to say? The truth, he said gently. Which is what? She muttered, wanting to mash the paper up into a tiny ball and stab Chris with the pencil. That Matt died protecting a friend, and we're sorry for not being able to stop Chris. Also, that we're both alive and holding our own, and to make sure they give Matt every honor. I'm sure Colin will make certain, she said quietly. She set to work scribbling down the words. She finished, adding a brief description of the events leading up to Matt's unnecessary death, and read it back over. Her grip on the pencil tightened in fresh anger. It sounds so hollow. Shannon knows Matt, knows what kind of person he was, like us. She doesn't need more. She'll understand. I know. I can't believe how much I'm going to miss him. How much I already miss him. I hadn't known him very long at all, obviously, but Matt had that effect on people. Chris, too, unfortunately, Russ said dryly, touching her knee gently. It'll be all right, Morgan. She forced herself to take a deep breath and nodded. I know, she said, before folding the paper and setting it on the tray beside the 4 empty bowls of food. Morgan let her head fall back against the stone again. Russ shifted beside her, then his good arm slipped around to rest across her shoulders. She opened her eyes, looking at him, and felt herself smile. Thanks, she murmured. His own head was resting against the stone, but he smiled without opening his eyes. You're welcome. She cautiously leaned her head against his shoulder, liking the feel of being near another person. He didn't jerk his shoulder away, but instead gently let his head fall against hers. Sleep well, he murmured. If she hadn't felt suddenly exhausted, she might have laughed.